Okay, we'll probably get started here now. Maybe a number of maybe left after the meal and so to get their afternoon nap in, but this is going to be your chance to share. And, everything's been kind of programmed and it's really gone smoothly, but I think people have some things that I want to hear about their memories from long ago. I was never one who was really into all the history stuff until I hit about 60. Now I am. Now I like all the history stuff, and I ask a lot of questions. My grandma Seibel was, Helen Seibel was my source of information, and then also Virgil Litke. So when I started getting interested in the past and the history and things, those are who I'd go to. Now, Irene and Bob are the ones that are left, and I sat close to Bob on the tour yesterday, so there's questions I still want to ask him. But we were going to start off with a video, and it's really well done, and it's from 25 years ago, and you'll see people who have passed, and they were sharing just like we're going to share now, but they shared 25 years ago, so you'll find that interesting. But Lee Suderman has to leave early, and before we show the video, he said he'd like to just take a minute or two to talk about the future of our church.
Thank you. As a kid that grew up on a farm, I see the farms getting bigger and bigger and bigger and fewer between and so on. I've often wondered what's the future of a church out in the country. And that's what I saw yesterday in the bus trip. I was encouraged. I was really and listened to Pastor Gaylord and Pastor Rick today. I have great hopes and anticipation of what this church as a country church can do in the days ahead. And I just want to say a little bit something about this emblem up there. I think of that song, like a tree planted by the water, we shall not be moved. And so that's one of the reasons why I just really feel that if we do things that meet the needs of the people who are out in the country, they may still come and worship with us in town. But when I saw how many times on the bus trip they said, oh, that couple helped start that church over there, or that church over there, or whatever. And there will always be those people who will probably come to this place for their church, but they live someplace else. And I think that with the right kind of leadership, and I think that was demonstrated, I think that there's a tremendous future for this church as a country with an outreach that just doesn't quit. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you could come here, Lee, and you be free to leave whenever you want to, but thank you for your input to the program this weekend. Okay, if Derek's queued up for this video here, maybe we'll turn some lights down too. After that, then we'll turn the mics over to you guys.
About 125 years ago, Mennonite Brethren pioneers came to this area and established Ebenfeld Mennonite Brethren Church. It was fitting for the name Ebenfeld because they selected this site to locate their church because it was an Ebenfeld, an even field, a good place to build. We're going to visit with some of the members of this congregation, and some of these have memories that are just valuable. We're actually going to also visit with the oldest living member of the Ebenfeld congregation and get some of her thoughts of what it was like back in some of those early years and early days at Ebenfeld. Memories that would be lost if it were not for this opportunity to visit with them today. The history of Ebenfeld is long and rich. In fact, it is the first organized Mennonite Brethren church in North America, and that gives us cause to celebrate now and for years to come.
The first Ebenfeld church, as I've been told by old-timers, of course, was in the Gnadau village. And we gathered there for until about 1877, 78. We have here the drawing by A.R. Ebel, and he drew this probably from some of his childhood memories, but also what old-timers have told him, and described the dimensions and the window and door locations. So this has been strictly drawn from memory. There are no known photos of the very first Ebenfeld church on this site.
It was difficult for some people to accept music and a new style of music, or even music at all, and musical instruments at the founding of the church. But it has changed and progressed and grown through it.
I believe, and I have heard people say that music is just as important as a sermon. Now that makes it sound pretty selfish, but music does something to the to your innermost being. When you I certainly wouldn't want to be the one that was not my quote, but music does something to condition you to receive what the Lord would want you to get out of the service, I believe. And so I've always enjoyed the fact that music is an important part of the service.
Some years ago we had more singing than we do now. Sometimes we had a male chorus, senior male chorus, and a young men's chorus, and a church choir, and sometimes a quartet.
And music to this day has continued to change and progress and reflect the times and the culture that is current.
That was the center of all our activities. That's where we played ball. That's where we went to church. That's where we went to Sunday school. That's where we had practices for our choir, and we had 3 male courses at one time. My dad's was the oldest one, and there was another one in between our ages, and then I was in the youngest one. So with all those practices, that took most of the weekend.
But church was a center of activity. Church was our life. Church was Sunday school picnics. One thing about our cultural life was probably the music and the practices of the different groups, especially choir. That's where the boys and girls could get together and have an evening and actually communicate. But many couples did do their getting acquainted part in the choir practice. But before our time, revivals even took place at choir practices. They would have prayer meetings, and outsiders would come and listen to the practice, I'm told, and people would be saved. So this church has always had a spirit of evangelism and missions and outreach.
Throughout the history, there's been several experiences that have really helped shape this congregation. First and foremost, there was really a spirit of feeling that God was leading them throughout all the good times as well as the bad times. One of those bad times came in December of 1924, when the church building that was so part of everyone's life, the central to the society, central to the culture, and central to every church member, burned to the ground by fire.
The Sunday, December 21, 1924, it was a cold day. We went to church very regular, as usual. That morning it was cold and dreary, and we went and had our church services and the Sunday school, then we had already our classes in the morning. And then we all were, I think I sang in the choir then already. And I was 17, 18 years when this happened. And we went to church, and as usual, nothing happened. Nothing was noticeable that was smoke or anything. But we went home, and we were sitting around the dinner table and eating. And I think my brother and his wife were there for dinner. I know we had him there. And then we visited, and all at once a telephone rang. The telephone rang. It was 10 shorts. That was, we knew what that meant. We meant that was very important. Some either announcement, or if we couldn't have church, we'd call off the church, and the person would ring 10 shorts, and then we all we had individual telephone people, and they were all on the line. Should say that we hear you, and that person that told us the church is on fire, and that's all he said. The church is on fire. Oh, we were all so terrible shattered.
I was a lad of 8 years old when that happened. In those days of company telephone lines, there was a system of 10 short rings when everybody was alerted, and that happened while we were sitting at the dinner table Sunday before Christmas. And somebody announced that the church was on fire, and of course we all went outside and could see that it was burning. The west end of the church was ablaze at that time.
We came home from church that Sunday, and the telephone rang, and my dad went to the phone while I was setting the table. We were going to eat. We just got home. And pretty soon he came with his coat. He says, "Church is on fire." Everything, just stopped.
I think the fire
right
was
there.
halfway through the church at the time when I got here. And I remember that the old church was built very similar to this one. Matter of fact, this church is built on the same foundation, just with repair. Had these small entrances from the side, very similar to the one that is here on the north side of the church. And they got the door open on the south side, and that's how they got a few items out of there, including some benches, which are still upstairs in this sanctuary.
Before we got here close by, there the smoke was coming. Oh, we said, our church is going, our church is going. And then we came there, the people were all distraught and crying, and why this? What shall we do now?
Of course, it was a major tragedy for this community.
When we had this fire, we were all so helpless, and we were all poor people, but the Lord really intervened, because we really all prayed and had services to God should direct us what we should do.
The movers and the shakers of the church at that time, they very quickly determined that we needed a place to meet, and they built a temporary building south and east of the church, which we called the Tabernacle.
And this church has had tremendous revivals, as did all churches, not just our Mennonite Brethren Church, but Methodist Church in Olney, and all the churches in the community would have revivals. And revivals are different than most people in the generations today think of. Revivals worked by the Holy Spirit's leading almost to I use the term masses, but I mean areas. A revival would break out in the area. Now we hear of people being saved, or people added to the church, or people that are wanted, you know, it's different. Then there were revival meetings. People, strangers would come, visitors would come, and it would grow into the next, out of the community even, into the next area. And
well, revival was always a very important part in our churches. And I remember my mother especially talking about the revival when she was saved, and that was back in 1892 with Peter Wadle, I think his name was. And there were like 50 people that were saved at one time and baptized. It was a great time. But revival was just a place where everybody went. It was a social time. It was, you didn't go to ball games. You went to revival meetings.
Revival changed the community. It changed the church. It changed the family. It wasn't just, I can't explain it. It was the Holy Spirit worked in that way at that time.
One of the things that's also been a part of Ebenfeld's history and continues to this day is the spiritual birth and renewal that has happened. Ebenfeld was known for being on the cutting edge of such things as Sunday school, revivals, and baptisms. Baptisms sometimes in history, there were large groups, as many as 50, 20 individuals going out to nearby creeks in the area for their baptism.
It was in the North Cottonwood, and what was rather unique about it, because there were 3 ministers from our church, and they took turns. Because there was such a large group, it probably was fitting that all 3 of them participated in this.
But one thing we have to remember is all of the work that had to be done prior to our baptism. You know, we did it in open streams, and they had to find a place where there was solid footing underneath, and they would build a walkway going down into the water with a rail on the side or a rope where you could hold on to walk down. And tents would have to be put up on the bank, several tents, 2 or 3. One of them was, of course, was for the males, and the other was for females, you know. And all of that work had to be done.
Oh, well, that was fun to go to baptisms, because we always found a creek somewhere that was suitable. And this particular one was, they called it the Funk Creek. It's where the Brudertal Dam, or the reservoir is now. And I know that my dad would often help prepare for baptisms. They would often get a wagon load of sand and put it in the creek bottom so that you wouldn't walk in mud. And if that didn't work, they would spread out gunny sacks, and they would make a little ramp with a railing so you could walk up and down easily.
Modesty was a very big thing in those days. And the girls were told to wear rubber raincoats. I mean, they were heavy rubber raincoats. They were actually rubber. They weren't plastic. I don't think we had plastic at that time.
Then we came back to the church, and you know, we didn't have hair dryers, but we were all in the same boat, you know, creek water hair strangling, and it didn't make any difference. This is how it was. And then we called it the Upnome, that's Low German, the reception or the taking up of the candidates.
Sunday school is one of those things we take for granted today, but it wasn't always so. In fact, Sunday school wasn't before the worship service in some of the earlier times. In fact, there are some times when there wasn't Sunday school at all. Ebenfeld, in fact, was an innovator in Sunday school, and some of the leaders at Ebenfeld went out and did seminars and workshops on how to conduct Sunday school. Sunday school, however, wasn't in a nice, quiet room when it first started. We were divided by curtains. And sometimes some of our students were more interested maybe what was happening on the other side of the curtain than on their side. And so it took a lot of discipline for them to say, okay, I'm going to pay attention to what's going on here.
Usually Sunday school was in the afternoon, and the families brought their picnic, we call it picnic lunch now, but they simply brought their basket of food. After 2 and 3 sermons in the morning, they had lunch together, and then the afternoon was a Sunday school service.
We had Steinrich people coming to our church so often, and that was hard for them to stay over noon hour until we had our Sunday school in the afternoon. But they brought their lunches along and we ate in the basement, and then at 2 o'clock I think we had started with our Sunday school.
When I came here, we didn't have any annex. We had only this structure and the basement. And I think we had 4 or 5 classes on the main floor here, and 2 upstairs. There must have been about 5 or so in the basement. And teachers were elected every year.
I remember when we hung the curtains. At first, we didn't even have curtains. We just met in groups, in sections, which was certainly distracting. If you didn't like what went on in your class, you could always listen to the next one.
Well, when I got here, we just had wires across with curtains, and we were side by side.
That Sunday school teachers can be very impressive in their life, especially in your early years.
One of the other programs that was a part of Ebenfeld's history and still continues is that of the Christian Endeavor program. The Christian Endeavor, or CE program, was really a program that got the youth involved. It was thought, this is a way to train future leaders. This combination of parliamentarian, organizational work was combined with music talent and testimonies and other kinds of things in the life of young people to help bring them along into the leadership of the church.
I remember it was a time when, of course, Christian Endeavor was in the German it was Jugendfreund, which was a youth organization strictly. And I recall the evening when they decided that the chairman for the Christian Endeavor shouldn't be past 40 years of age, because it was a young people's organization.
CE was a very important part of our life. We had CE every Sunday night, and we had the early CEs. Before my time, you had to be a member. Not anybody could be in CE. The Christian Endeavor was operated by membership. Anybody could come to the service, but you could not be on the program unless you were a member.
And the president should never be over 40 years old. That was meant for young people, and to give young people a start to perform.
Some of the other things that caused some change and some growth in this congregation was a transition from German to English. That was a large controversy in its time, and it was difficult for some people to change.
Well, it was quite traumatic. We had a few of the younger people who thought it was time that we changed languages, and then it was a kind of a transition that didn't always go smoothly, but it came about.
There were some old people that couldn't talk American language very well. For them it was kind of hard.
Older folks, maybe my dad, they were a little hard to adjust, you know. They were used to German, you know. But they finally got it done, you know.
Oh, that's such a change. You know, a good thing we can forget things that happened, and that change was hard on everybody, especially young people. They started, then we had only English schools, and that helped to get over that hump. And we did, and we were all finally got happy about it.
This is one kind of a sad thing about that German part. I suppose I was about 16 years old, having attended church every Sunday. I was probably 15, 16 years old before I understood a message from the pulpit. But when you think of it, or the songs we sang, I didn't know what the words were. And I wasn't alone on it. Anybody younger than me had the same experience. Those somewhat older than me, they got it. The World War II changed that drastically. But all that, being in war with Germany, we tend to get more and more to the English language because there was a conflict of interest, you might say, in our country with German-speaking people.
We always, in Sunday school, we got a little picture with the verse on it. And I think we usually memorized them. But that was German. Der Herr ist mein Hirte, mir wird nichts mangeln. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Also hat Gott die Welt geliebt, dass seinen eingeborenen Sohn gab, auf dass alle, die an ihn glauben, sollen leben immer da. The Lord, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
One of the other transitions that happened in Ebenfeld was the change from lay leadership to professionalization. And it was a dramatic change and somewhat traumatic as well when the leadership transitioned from being all volunteer to paid leadership.
Well, we had quite a few retired ministers. There's Christy Seibel and J.W. Lawrence and Dick Lawrence and John Dick. And I think we had 5 or 6, and they changed around on Sunday. It was pretty bedtime, you know.
One thing I would have to say is we've always received good preaching. We've had good pastors, good leaders. I have sometimes said we've had good preachers and we've been taught well, we have no excuse.
Well, yeah, Reverend Berg was our first paid pastor. Because G.W. Lawrence did it for a long time. He did a good job. Yeah. And then we voted Mr. Berg from Tabor. Mm-hmm. And he was our pastor then for a while. Mm-hmm. The first paid pastor we had, yeah.
And also behind the church is a cemetery where many of the families are buried, and also some of those early founders that were a part of this congregation.
There's another thing I'd like to refer to, and that is digging graves. You know, digging graves with a machine now, that's only a recent, maybe in the last 30 years, which I call recent. Most of those have been dug by hand. And you don't understand the significance of digging a grave here if you don't know what Ebenfeld gumbo is like. We have dug in frost and in 100-degree weather in summer. A lot of times with pick from top to bottom. Pick all the way, you know, that's this kind of a soil here we have here.
It's been a church that's remained consistent in its belief, always true to the Word, always is important to have preachers and lay leaders who were founded in God's Word and were strong leaders within the church.
John Gearbund was a pastor here at Ebenfeld when Elda and I were married in California and came back. And I think that he stands out as one person that has a significant impact on both Elda and my lives. One reason is a very outgoing person, not only he, but his wife and his children as well.
Well, I would have to mention J.K. Hebert, who was leader for quite a while. He was a very brilliant, loving, gentle person. He, I think, served this congregation very, very well in the early years, unpaid, of course. And he was a brilliant man. I think he did more for Ebenfeld than any other one individual that I could think of.
Hebrews chapter 11, where The writer talks of all the heroes of faith. Finally gets to verse 32, and he gives up. He says he can't mention all of them. There are too many of them. Time to run out. That's the same way with people at Ebenfeld that made Ebenfeld. There are many people that were involved without public noticing that did the work that made everything go. And we always recognize leaders, pastors, preachers, deacons, and maybe the song leaders. That's very important. Well, we should recognize them. But there are a lot of other that are just as important. Then I would also like to refer to keeping up our physical plant. And there you'd, if you had a difficult job, you know, and something that took some engineering, you called on Dave Lepke.
Albert Horton was a great figure, an orphan boy that was raised in this community, Chicago or fire orphan boy. And he was the greatest asset in that kitchen that any church could have ever had.
But Sunday morning, he'd come by about 9 o'clock. He'd come by my place. He'd go to Sunday school here. Rain or shine. One time, Harry was telling me, you know, the water was pretty high, you know, over the bridge. But he still made it across. He didn't want to break his record, I guess.
Over to my left is the cemetery, and in that cemetery lies the remains of Abraham Cornelson, one of the founders of Ebenfeld Mennonite Brethren Church, among many others who were leaders in this congregation.
Now the kids come to Bible school or they go to camps to be saved, but no, I don't think the Spirit hasn't left us in any way. A lot of it was so legalistic when I was a kid that sometimes the Spirit couldn't really work the way he should have.
There's a lot is being written or talked about traditional as well as contemporary music. In my growing up years, there was a change that came about because of the language problem. I could never quite understand why people couldn't accept the English language. Of course, I was a younger one, and my dad probably and mom had to deal with that a lot. But you know, now, if I tried to explain the contemporary and a traditional thing, that in a way sort of resembles about the language concerns back in those years. And it just takes time. And I think we need to accept it because it's there and it's going to be there, and I think that, but it does take time to do that.
You've heard us talk about the old building, the building that burnt, and all of those other memories. So you've seen the past, the present, and now the future.
Oh, with all the young people we have, it's exciting. The only thing is they have so many opportunities to go everywhere, but that's okay. As long as we can send them out, the Lord will provide people for us to send out. Yeah, I'm excited about our future.
Ebenfeld has stood in this hill for 125 years. For those 125 years, it's been surrounded by fields just like this, growing fields, trees, things that are growing. So what does the future hold for Ebenfeld in the next years ahead? 25 years from now, it celebrates its 150th anniversary in the year 2026. Will the church be here? I think it will be. And I think it will be because the church is alive and growing, just like everything around it. Our theme for the 125th anniversary is a tree, from Psalm 1 verse 3 that said, "He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth his fruit in his season." And Ebenfeld is a tree. Its roots go down deep, deep into God's word and deep into trust and faith in Jesus Christ. The trunk of Ebenfeld is strong and firm because it's been the trunk of righteousness and Christ-like living. The tree always changes because new limbs grow, fruit is produced. And that's going to continue to happen. Ebenfeld's going to change. But the same things will remain. Jesus Christ, the root, God's word, and his righteousness. And so the future looks good for Ebenfeld. One day, maybe this ground will become houses. Who knows? More than likely it'll remain cropland, growing cropland. But I believe Ebenfeld's going to continue on until Jesus Christ comes again, because it's like a tree.
Thanks for being with us and taking this trip down memory lane. We hope you enjoyed listening to some of our members talk about their memories and some of the things about Ebenfeld Mennonite Brethren Church on this, the 125th anniversary. But this church isn't just about the past, it's also about the future. And the future is bright, the future is good, the future is strong. And with God's help, it will continue to grow and continue to impact lives and members in the community. Remember, this is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish.
Okay, I thought that was really good. The sound and the video maybe not quite together, but the sound was good. So, Derek, you want to put that deal on? Okay, now it's your turn, and I put some things over there that might spark your memory for some memories from the past. And there's a number of things I'd like to hear, learn a little bit more about, but I'll start out one myself, then you guys take over after that. And I'm going to take men's side, women's side for 400. I was a young boy, and my grandpa and grandma, Sam and Helen Seibel, lived right across the road over there. And it was a Sunday night. It was a Sunday, late afternoon, dusk. And we didn't have church that night for some reason, and Grandpa was the custodian, and he looked out the picture window of the house over there and said, someone left a light on at the church. So he said, Brad, could you run over there and turn that light on? And I said, sure, I can do that. Then there was some second thoughts because the light was on in the basement. And I still have these feelings today when I walk into a church when nobody's around and it's maybe dark, and I just get a creepy feeling just being in a real quiet church. And you think about funerals here and stuff, and here I'm sitting. And you remember the story about God speaking to Samuel in the temple. So anyway, I did that, and then not only was it in the basement, it was a girls' bathroom that was light was on. Okay, and we didn't have a fellowship hall then, so the basement was center of all kinds of activity. But when church was out and it was getting dark, it was no longer just the basement, it was the basement, you know. And I had to go there, and I came in that door, women's side, you know, and had to go down that steps over there, right back there, And boys just didn't go down the girls' steps over there. That's just not where boys would go. And we'd more likely go down this way. And then I really didn't want to make, it was very, very quiet, and I didn't want to make any loud noise. I just wanted to get down there and turn it off. And I got about halfway down that stairway, and this is the absolute truth. I heard this heavy breathing behind me. I mean, it was like that. And I did not look back. I mean, I put my feet in road gear and went down as fast as I can and never looked back and turned that light off. And I mean, I was really scared. It was a sinister sound. It was, and I turned that light off, and I should have stopped at the boys' restroom, but I ran through the church and back out to Grandpa's place. I don't know if I looked for traffic or anything, and I didn't tell anybody. I just said, "Grandpa, the lights are off," and then I went to the bathroom, and I would think about that for about 2 years. I just could not figure out what could be that sound, that breathing. It had to be somebody. And the only thing I could think of, and it may or may not be it, but Jacob Penner, he was a former custodian here. He's an older man, very old man, and he was a widower and just lived by himself. He spoke mainly German, low German, and he would, the only thing I could think of was that he had saw that the light was on also, and maybe came to turn it off. And since he was older, he would have climbed those, I'm doing my detective work here now, climbed those steps and maybe got winded, came around like that, and then that's when I heard this sound. I don't know if that's true because the light would have been on this corner. I don't know if he could have seen it from over there. But that's one of my memories of the men's side and the women's side. And I look back there, and also all the hooks. They've never taken those hooks down. If you go back, women and men first, or both, hooks about this far apart, 2 rows. You know, anybody have any experiences about those hooks? Did anybody remember coming in and every hook had a hat on it, or a lady's hat or something like that? Those are the kind of things we want to hear about. So pick a category there and be willing to share. I'll bring the mic around. And, surely Christian Endeavor program, that's got to spark some memories. Things like that. So. Back there, and I'll bring it to you. Sure.
So a few quick words. Shauna and I came quite a ways for this weekend, and it's been great. But we have a drive yet today. So Bill and Shauna, we began attending here probably in the fall of '84 when Shauna came to Tabor. And then I followed in '85. And then we served in youth ministry 87 through 90. So Erwin and Joyce's last year, Clarence's interim year, and then Gaylord and Peggy's first year. So that's our tenure. A lot of great memories. I put them on my phone. Some of the antics that happened at the schoolhouse, I won't go into a lot of detail. I'll leave that to MBYers who were there at the time. As I took in the reflections on Christian Endeavor, I decided we're just going to frame those under Christian Endeavor. And call it good, because many of those leaders in your church now are here. And that was part of those MBY years of having fun, a sense of belonging, and having a great time. And thankfully, there was reference to Joel and Bible memory, so something biblical and spiritual was happening over there as well. Beyond MBY, as we reflected on our time here, the first thought that came to mind for me was, wow, we were young. And to be charged with leadership in the way we were. And I think about the 2 service trips to Reynosa and Chicago. And the fact that as parents, you granted us the opportunity to take your children there and do the things we did, which were very meaningful and good, but away from home. was substantial. So thank you for that trust and that care. And obviously, this was a praying congregation. No doubt about it. I think Shauna look at our time here as sort of chapter 1 of our lives. We've transitioned quite a bit. We made choices to leave Ebenfeld, the Mennonite Brethren, transitioned vocationally to North Newton and then Goshen. Part of our DNA. But this was chapter 1, and this weekend has been rereading chapter 1 a bit. And that's been good. So thank you.
Okay. I couldn't decide among these topics, so I'll just say I'm going to cover most of them. So I'm Dawn Suderman. I belong to Joel. I've been here for 15 years. So this is a story about people and about community, which I think covers most of those. So I've been here for 15 years. And when I got here, I was so overwhelmed because there were so many people, and I didn't know any of them except for my husband. And so Joel and I, we were sitting in church, and we were sitting right over there, and Aunt Irene was sitting in our row, and it was right before Christmas, and I was so invested in making sure I made the Christmas cookies, so I had Christmas cookies on my mind. Now, my dad died when I was 2, and my mother raised me by myself. She never remarried because she was always afraid that whoever it was would treat me badly. And my family is small and dying. And so, coming here and realizing there's a lot of people I need to get to know in my new life, it was a lot. And so somebody was playing the organ, and I had Christmas cookies on my mind. And I leaned over to Joel, and I said, "Is that Rubina on the oven?" And it struck both of us. We could not stop laughing, and we shook the pew for so long laughing, we just couldn't stop. And then Aunt Irene leaned over to us, and she said, "Now, when I was little, if I acted up, my mother would say, 'Do like this to me.'" And that didn't help. But it was so hilarious. So I have to say, I am so grateful for all of you, and I'm married well.
Next. Say who you are, too.
Greg Suderman, oldest son of Paul and Elda Suderman, and my sister Rhonda and Sister Dina are here too. I've just been really glad that I came back for this, because I don't think till I got here and started meeting people did I think again about Ebenfeld and how foundational that's been in my life. And I would say, I think that's true for a lot of us who are no longer here, but have taken our experiences to new settings. As far as thinking back, I would say MBY is one of my biggest memories. Well, Sunday school and Bible class on Wednesday, they are too, but MBY, I looked so much forward to being old enough to be in MBY, especially so we could go Christmas caroling. We started at 11 or so after the Christmas program, broke up into 2 groups, had a midway stop, and then both groups got together at the end, and there were people who gave us treats, and the bus trip reminded me of some of these places that are pretty far out, but we made sure we went to everybody in the church, which is just another example of the kind of community that Ebenfeld is. So thank you all for the people who knew me and have been a part of my life and helping me who I am now. And but I'm sure that goes for many other people too. Thanks.
My name's Glenn LaGris, and I thought I might just share a little bit about the making of the video. Our youngest son was working in a TV station at that time, and I encouraged him to come do this video. He was able to get a camera from the TV studio to be able to shoot the video. The questions that were being answered by the people, and as I heard them speak, I heard many people around me, oh, that's that person, you know, but big memories there. And I had kind of forgotten who all we had interviewed. But I would let them know the questions ahead of time. And I'd say, you look at me, you and I are having a conversation, and Scott's going to be shooting over my shoulder. And that's why you have the angle shot. And he put this back, edited it and put it back together, I think, in one night. Appreciate that work. And it was a fun thing to do, and we enjoyed doing it. So memories are with things like that. And it was good to be here, and we enjoyed our time here while we were here. Oh, I also probably must say, he showed his bias during some of this. When he went through the cemetery, he showed the grave marker of Diane's dad. And also he had Grandpa Lepke, Dave Lepke, singled out there. And someone mentioned that Dave was the engineer. I understand from the family mythology that he's the one that suggested this floor be at an angle so that people in the back see. So there you are.
Did you want to speak? Okay.
I'm going to say something about women's ministry. You know, Satan wants to work when there's something good going on. Over 25, I think it's 30 years, Steve and Donna Hanneman were the first to do something back there in our new fellowship hall, and it was their wedding reception. Had a wonderful time. Well, we had a group come in. We had a lady come in from Oklahoma City who had been at the bombing of the Murrah building, and she had survived. She was of a dark color skin. She spoke, we had a wonderful time. However, where's Joel? There you are. Yeah, Joel, what happened on Wednesday night? When all the burners were on and all that thing? Yes. It might have been 2 weeks later, it might have been. Yes. Joel came in on a Wednesday night and the burners were all on, and it was meant to burn because the fire extinguisher was thrown out in the cemetery also. And we have pictures up that Donna took, and we had it in the area over here, and they had taken something and written 666 across her picture. It was meant for harm, and God has provided.
I want to speak to Wednesday night prayer meeting. Oh, Mark Rogers. Wednesday night prayer meeting. And going back, I saw Dan Fote's picture up there. I'd kind of forgotten about him, but back in the 80s and 90s, I was involved in a prayer meeting with Dan Fote and some other guys. Good memories. But then, since we moved back here 25 years ago, Wednesday night prayer meeting with Irene Seibel and Joe and Jan and Lucille Clausen. Just really special people to listen to them pray and to hear these older people confess their sins humbly in prayer. It's just, I miss that. And then COVID came and my job changed, so I'm working Wednesday nights, and then Nancy and I got involved working with a group at Peabody on Wednesday nights, so I haven't been part of that, I confess. I haven't been part of that Wednesday night prayer meeting for years, but I really miss that. And to speak about the greatness of Ebenfeld and the future of Ebenfeld, it starts in a prayer meeting.
Well, it's not well. That's how I start these days. Kind of have to think about it. My name is Vern Clausen, but you don't know me as Vern Clausen. You know me what my mother would holler at me when I was bad, and that's George Laverne Jr. So George's son, George Laverne, was here during the 60s. And I'm not going to be that short. I came a long way for this, and this will probably not be back for your 175th anniversary, but I'll try. Wait, the long way? Denver, Colorado. Yes. But you're known to proliferate a lot of centurions around here, so I might be back for the 175th. We don't know. But Greg opened the door about MB wires, and I wanted to say a little bit about that. Let me ask you quickly with a raising of your hands, how many of you were Ebenfeld MB wires here? Look at that, MB wires at Ebenfeld. Okay, now put your hands down. How many of you were in our MBY during the 60s when Pastor George was here in the, well, not too many will admit, the 1960 to 70, 71, yeah. Okay, I want to confess to you that one of the elders came to me in the 60s and said, you know, all you MBYers, you're all going to the dogs. That was what they said. Our youth today is going to the dogs. Well, that was quite a charge. And he ended up being my father-in-law. So I felt I had to prove to this guy that we weren't all going to the dogs. But as president of the MBY, and I don't know how they picked me other than maybe they thought a preacher's kid knew how to be a director of the MBY, but I followed Clint Seibel and Ralph Seibel. And so think of the pressure to have to follow those two gentlemen, could sing, could lead singspirations like we've never seen before, guitar and the works. I was very intimidated. But after electing me, they also elected a vice president, and she was a fire plug. And it happened to be that same elder's daughter, Janet Harder, as vice president. It was very convenient because we were dating at the time, and we had a lot of secret MBY meetings. And in the back seat of my car. so maybe
You're violating an open meeting law.
Well, we have a long ride home, don't we, hon? But that got me to thinking that, reflecting back, maybe we were kind of ornery bunch of MBYers at this time. And so I got to thinking that I should kind of reflect with you some of the things that might have caused him to say, "You're all going to the dogs." Because we were quite a rowdy bunch. Greg talked about the great Christmas Eve singing, but I have a few things behind the scenes that you may not have known about, and I don't believe Pastor George and Lydia knew much about them either. But just a short list here. I will tell you that during this era, a number of us guys at Hillsborough High School wore our gym shorts to class, causing H. by Cleaver to say, "Do you want us to see your hairy legs?" So wearing shorts in class was something we pioneered in. Do you know that when we got out of school in the afternoon, the Hillsborough Sundays was off the list for the minute. The Hillsborough Sundays, they played songs by someone named Elvis Presley and the Beatles. And I will confess that I saw quite a few Ebenfelders there listening to the Elvis Presley. And I happened to just be casing the joint. Do you know about all of the beer pitchers that got stolen from Shakey's during that period of time? I also observed those beer pitchers that were taking. How about the way we raced cars down 13 Mile Road? I could see some of you remember those days. I could do the 13 miles in 8.3 minutes with my 59 Chevy. And once again, Pastor Clausen had no idea about that. We did, at that time, have many of our people not appreciate the fancy cars that a lot of people drove. I myself am known to have taken Pastor Clausen's all-black Fairlane Ford, slapped silver baby, the baby moons on it, and go dragging down Main Street with the Pastor Clausen's car with baby moons on it. How he survived his ministry here, I'll never know. We tried to see who could take those correctional turns out there, curves, at 90 miles an hour or less. Unfortunately, you have heard some did not make it going on the correctional curves. And depending on how good tires you had, we had several of us get tickets on Highway 56 for too loud mufflers. Yeah, but when the pastor's son got taken home by the highway patrol, a lot of that stopped, and the mufflers got changed from six packs there to more legal mufflers.
Vern, I think those were glass packs. Not
Yeah, that's a good idea. Some of us rolled rubber tires down Main Street in Hillsborough, set them all up in a pile, and started a fire. That was a typical Halloween trick. And not only did we start fires with these rubber tires, but then a bunch of very creative fellows went around and turned all the fire plugs open so that when the fire guys came, there was no water. And so that was really, you know, we were going to the dogs during those days. The state stop signs were stolen from the city dump. Someone spray painted the Joe Skelly service station. We dragged Maine in Newton and picked fights with the Mexican gangs. And that was scary because they suddenly came out with chains and with knives, and we only had sweebuck and horsewhips. And the Mennonites didn't last very long under those circumstances. I'm almost done. Excuse me. The next page is short. I got it. Okay. Thank you. Our favorite place, of course, for smooching was, for those of us that did smooch, was the cemetery, just out east of town. Yeah. Dead men tell no lies, and I guess we thought that it was okay out there. Some of us took our clothes off and smoked at Yentruck. Yentruck, Courtney's Pond spelled backwards. Yentruck. Yeah, Clint knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, no. We were rule breakers during this period. This was the period when Mennonites probably went to their first movie house. And my movie of difference was, it was Mary Poppins. Such an evil movie to break away. What was yours? Mm-hmm. We played pool at the Hillsborough bowling alley. And in fact, one of our members owned the Hillsborough bowling alley. And so that was an era where we were breaking through. So I think what the problem was is a lot of this was the pastor's own son that was doing this. And I could go on, but we're gonna let sleeping dogs lie. Who let the dogs out? Wolf, wolf. You know, Satan did at that point. And many of us have confessed to our later years when we felt bad about that. But even though we were messed up kids, what my dad taught was a message of grace and mercy and love. I'm now in a church where we are all Pentecostals, and we believe that even though we're messed up, we can pursue a perfect God. And I think that's what we were doing, pursuing a perfect God. Our story of redemption was that, look at us now. The prodigal sons have come home. We have come home back to Ebenfeld, and we're victorious. And we are now, as we learned last night, we are now missionaries. We are pastors. We are leaders in churches. We have established many spiritual gifts and used our gifts in many ways. But it occurs to me that God is not as proud of what we have accomplished and what we have changed, except that He is very excited about that we have raised Christian families. Our families, many of us can now proclaim that we trained our kids right, and now our grandkids are going to church, and St. Janet is going to become a great-grandmother someday, we just heard. And I think that's what God is proud of, is that we have passed on this legacy here in Bellevue, in Ebenfeld. My daddy preached the concept of grace, that for grace we are saved, not by works, lest anyone should boast, but by our faith. And I think today we can say that we have accomplished that. The song that I think of that we sing a lot in our church, maybe you do here, is called The Blessing. The Blessing by Elevation Worship is such a thing where we say, if you follow Jesus, he will bless your children, and their children, and their children, and their children's children, and those that go beyond us. And I think that our forefathers would be so excited, and they are praising God in heaven for how he is blessing our children. Thank you.
I'm Shirley Delk, one of Dad's 3 girls, Bob Delk. I just wanted to talk a little bit more too about the music in the church, because music isn't just getting up on the stage and singing when you're age of choir. I remember trying to think which corner of the basement. We would probably before Sunday school, when we were just little kids, probably 5 to 6 years old, we'd sit in all these chairs and we'd sing before we went to Sunday school. We'd sing before Bible school. We'd sing all the time. And that was what I loved, because I still sing today. But then we couldn't really join choir until we were sophomores in high school. And some of us couldn't wait. At least I couldn't wait till I was a sophomore in high school and I could finally join the choir and start singing. I don't know if you remember that too, but we couldn't if we were freshmen or 8th graders. We had to wait till we were sophomores. And then also just daily vacation Bible school was 2 weeks long, from 8 in the morning till noon, and we'd have our parents bring snacks, and we always couldn't wait till our mom could bring the snacks. And now Bible school's 3 or 4 nights in a week, and it's very short in the evenings maybe. And those were real times for me. And again, music, we'd have a program on Friday night after the second week, and a lot of singing and plays and recitations and all that. So music was a great part of my growing up here at Ebenfeld. But music went beyond these walls. I remember Dad playing guitar for a quartet with Denny, Elmer, Les, and Eldon. And they would go to the Abilene jail and play, right? And other programs. And I remember in MBY, again, I couldn't wait to get to MBY, and we did a lot of singing, and I think I was president my senior year, and a lot of you were in MBY with me. But I remember giving musical programs at the Assyria Church that Henry Brooks preached at, and Hartford Mennonite, or not Mennonite Church, but Hartford Church, because probably the Methodist. Henry Brooks was minister for a short time. And then when he left, I think his son Paul was maybe a senior, and so they asked us to come give programs, and we did a whole, almost like well, not really a play, a cantata type. We had a book called Tell It Like It Is. I don't know if you remember that. And we sang through that book and gave programs, and singing at church camps, singing midwinter retreat at Rock Springs Ranch. Many of you remember that in January. But for me, it was always the singing that was so important, and singing the words were very meaningful, because they were, so many of the choruses we've forgotten about, but they all had meaningful words. And I know there's a lot of praise music now and stuff, and which is meaningful too, but all these little choruses. I would work in the field plowing for Dad and disking, and if you drove by, you could hear me singing probably above the tractor. I would go through every chorus that I could think of and sing. But luckily, I'm still able to sing today in my church. I go to Eden Church out by Mount Ridge. We still have a church choir. We have a ladies' chorus. We have a worship band. And I sing in those three. And we have a children's choir. And I'm sorry that there's no longer a choir here in this church. I think it's just real meaningful for us to still be able to get together and sing 4-part harmony. And I'm just so glad I can do that. Plus, I've sung in a trio for over 30-some years, and now it's a duet. And my friend and I, we go around to nursing homes and senior centers and give programs because these older people who even don't live in a nursing home yet, but need this kind of ministry. They look forward to having people come. So I encourage you, if you're in a musical group or get a group together and go sing to these people, because they sometimes don't have anything else to look forward to. They sit in the room all day and they want to hear. So my ministry has been more in music, but I learned it here at Ebenfeld and through the youth group and beyond. So that's been part of my favorite part of Ebenfeld. But I might just say a word about Laverne's family. His sister Naomi, if you remember her, and my sister Barb were very, very close, like this, because they were the only two in their age group. Right now, Naomi and Barb are in Portugal traveling together. Naomi has been around the world with her husband in mission work and in India and where else, I don't know. Bangladesh, the Congo, and Haiti, okay. And then they were in California for a while, and in Fresno and San Francisco, and then they lived in Denver, and now they're living in Kidron Bethel at North Newton, a block from Barb. So they've been kind of reunited, full circle around the world. But unfortunately, most of you probably know that Laverne's brother Phil and sister Mary passed away from Huntington's disease some time ago, and also your mother. So we're sad about that, but know they're in a better place. So.
Very good. Anybody else? Okay, Ron.
I'm going to be brief, but I'm going to touch on about 5 or 6 of these topics. One, I'd like to thank the church council 50 years ago that allowed the air conditioning to be turned on for our wedding. They had to take special meeting action to turn the AC on before June 1. And so we're thankful for that. That means Dina and I celebrated the centennial here and now the 150th anniversary, so 50 years of wedded bliss. So I guess that covers the wedding part. Richard Winnicky was the pastor that married us, and we hid our getaway car in his garage because there were some nasty guys that wanted to mess that car up. I think of the rescue mission and the Abilene jail services, among others, that we participated in often. Going to the rescue mission in Wichita, going to the Abilene jail, the number of people, the young people that would gather and we'd drive, we'd take the sandwiches or whatever we could, not to the jail, I guess, but to the rescue mission. And so those were valuable experiences. I miss the WMS mission sales. Those were always a highlight. And I will say, my brother and I schemed. I think sometimes they had a loaf of bread to start the sale. We schemed ahead of time to bid that loaf of bread real high. I don't know that we ever got it. And finally, I just wanted to say, sermons, other than Gaylord's this morning, I don't remember any of the sermons of the past 50 years. However, I do remember Erwin Clausen's sermon title, something about how to get out of a bear pit in the middle of the winter. I don't know if any of you remember that, but that was such an odd sermon title, and I don't even know what scripture reference it was, but it was just a catchy title. So anyway, thank you for all the memories of Ebenfeld and for the impact on our life. And I'll just close by saying, Dina and I sat where I think Steve and Donna and Brenda were sitting when we heard the call of God. No. Anyway, we don't know who was talking either. I say it was Harold Lowen and John Wall and others. But anyway, we sat in this section and clearly heard God's call for Christian service, which set apart probably the beginning chapters of a life of service. And so we always want to be, but I wonder who are the people we're hearing today calling out those to serve the church in many ways, and many are responding in various ways, but those were impactful times when we remembered missions and the call to service where we dedicated our lives. So thank you, Ebenfeld.
Brother Brad. Okay, I got to get my notes here as well. I'm speaking for my brother Kim right now. He had to get back to Texas, so he wanted me to read this. Okay, I've been looking forward to this weekend for many weeks. Well, I better say my name, Diane Schmidt. Diane Schmidt is who I am. Okay. As Kim prepared for this weekend, I pondered whether it should be a funeral of our historical church. But after spending the past 48 hours, I'm thrilled to see that it was a true celebration and a bright hope for the future. As I look back to the past and what I have gained from my 25 years here in Texas, I'm thankful for the training of honoring our elderly. We regularly visited Parkside and Salem Home and other area senior living centers for worship and Christmas caroling. I had no idea how that would build a foundation and a passion for the elderly. To this day, I have daily coffee with a group of 85-plus-year-old men and take them on an annual 3-day adventure trip. I've added 2 25-year-old twin young men that lost their dad to suicide. These young boys have bonded with these men. These young boys have bonded with these men as well and honor them daily. So thank you, Ebenfeld, for instilling this gift of loving all ages. Okay, that came from Kim. I am going to just add a word of thanks to the church for how we talked about how the church gave us opportunities to use our gifts and talents as young people. And I'm just going to talk briefly about the CE. Glenn back there. I started piano lessons, and my teacher was Joanne Suderman, who lives, on 140th. And then my next piano teacher was Carla Suderman. And those 2 teachers together got me started in playing that I could actually play well enough to play, 2 hands and play hymn songs. And so I had the opportunity to start with CE programs with playing my piano solos. And I remember distinctly the procedure of how the CE program would start, right? We would stand in the back, and the chairman and the secretary would come down this aisle, and then there was a table up here. Am I right so far? Okay. On the stage, and then we would always come in on, I think, the second verse of the second song of the evening. It always had to be the second verse because we had to make this processional. It was just so dramatic. It was just, why don't we just wait till the song's over and then come in? But no, we had to come in on that verse. Okay, then we get situated and begin. So just a little detail on that. That was still kind of comical. But nevertheless, I'm just so thankful that I got my start with music in this wonderful church, and I'm still using my gifts for God's glory in the church throughout our ministry and the churches where we've served as we have been in various states, and now coming all the way back, full circle, coming back to Hillsboro. So involved in worship team at Hillsborough MB and deacon ministry. So anyway, that's what I want to share.
I'm Joel Suderman. I've got two stories, and they are both on opposite ends of the spectrum here. So, Vern talked about your dad preaching on grace. I don't remember any of his sermons. I was just, real young when he was here. But I know he helped my dad. Your dad grew up on a farm. He liked to be out and help farmers when he could, doing stuff. And I think we were putting up alfalfa or doing something, and something went wrong. I don't know what went wrong, but Dad was kind of frustrated, and he was trying to fix whatever had broken. And your dad said, well, Grand Coulee. And my dad looked at him and said, what do you mean Grand Coulee? And he said, well, that's the biggest dam I can think of. And, Pastor, he was Reverend Clausen. He wasn't Pastor George. He was Reverend Clausen. But I found out he was a human. I mean, he got frustrated. And so once in a while, you have to just say Grand Coulee. And I don't know, I don't think Carol, what was her last name? Faith Foth's daughter. Anyways, she was here earlier. And, we saw Dan Fote up there. And I helped Glenn, he asked me to come and get some of the older people and bring them out to church, and Dan Foth was one of those. And so I got Dan from Parkside there, and he didn't drive anymore, so I brought him out here, and we got to talking about it, and I knew that Dan's grandpa had been Elder John Foth. He was one of the early and very staunch, very strict, very, he had certain rules. And the reason he had those rules, but he was kind of ornery, I guess you might say, in Russia. Before he became a Christian. He became a Christian, in Russia. But he had some some shortcomings back then, which he was going to try to correct. And he lived by some very strict rules. I mean, you don't use musical instruments in church. I've heard the story where he would get up and walk out if somebody was going to play a musical instrument in church. He was that strict. And we think, well, that's really crazy. Why would you not want to play a musical instrument in church? And another thing would be going to a theater for a show. And and Dan told me a story then that when Dan was a kid, probably in his early 20s or whatever, he wasn't married then yet, but Amy's grandpa, Herb Eitzen, in the city. And so Dan Foth and Harry Eitzen, who is Nancy's grandpa, they went to Kansas City to visit their friend Herb Eitzen. And while they were there, they went to a show. They went to a theater. And apparently when they got home, what did you do in Kansas City? What did you see? What everything? And so they would say, they admitted, they went to a show. But all of a sudden, Dan realized Grandpa Foth over here, Elder Foth, that would not fly with him. And so he was very scared, very intimidated about going to see Grandpa for any reason after that. And one day his mother sent him over to Grandpa's place to get whatever and who knows what. And so he went there, and Grandpa asked him, said, well, did you go to a show while you were in Kansas City? Because he knew he had. He couldn't lie his way out of that one. And so he admitted, yes, I did go. And his grandpa, rather than scold him, all he said was, well, when you left that show, were you closer to God or farther away? And he said that's all he ever said about it. And so I have to think about that every once in a while. When I do something, well, after I've done that, am I closer to God or am I farther away? So that's the lesson from Dan Foth.
There was two fears I had about coming to church, and that was to go back to that bulletin board over there and check the list of who had devotions. They would have us young, Glenn's gone, but how many of you young guys remember that we would be on the list for morning devotions at church? Or nobody else remembers that? Anyway, there was a list back there, and then there was like three of those older, real nice chairs up here, and then we'd have to come in, have prayer out there, and come back in there. I was very, very nervous that my name wasn't up there, and that goes with CE as well, Christian Endeavor, when Diane talked about kind of procedures. Well, the secretary would read the minutes of the previous program, and then I started tensing up because they're going to read the minutes, or read the ones who are going to be on the next program. And it was Brad Weens for reading or something like that. Didn't like that at all. But I guess I wouldn't be standing up here if I hadn't done those things. Anybody else? We got Chris over here.
This isn't my story. It's a good story from Irene. We saw in the video a couple references to Albert Horton. And because we've had some one-on-ones with Irene in the last few months, and we talk about the 150th, somehow it came up about Albert Horton, and we knew that she had some personal experience. So recently I said to Lavella, could you just write a short story about Albert? So the other day she brought this to me, and I'm not going to read all of it because some of it's a repeat, because it comes out of the Grace of Ebenfeld. It comes right out of the book, the facts. But I want you to hear the conversation. It was noon, and Sunday service was over, and my mom felt a tap on her shoulder. Mrs., I am coming to your house for dinner today. My mom replied, that's fine, Albert. You are welcome at our house for dinner. When dinner was over, Albert and my dad went into the parlor for a chat and a nap. At about 4, Albert came to the kitchen and announced, I am going home. My mom said, but Albert, I was just going to make coffee for Faspa. You can stay. Albert looked at my mom and replied, well, Mrs., if you're going to make coffee, do it now. My mom chuckled and said about making Faspa. And then refers to how he became a part of this community, accepting Christ as a teenager, being cared for by the Heberts and the Fos and the Funks. And then when he passed away, some of the funds that he had went to add on over here. And the plaque is up there that has his name to it. I know the plaque was there. I don't know if I ever knew what it was for, so.
Since Christine had the microphone, I think as near as I can tell, I was born on a Tuesday and I was in church the following Sunday, so I felt like that I had a pretty solid foundation as somebody who was related to the Lord. But I went to Kansas State, and that was the first time I ever heard about Mennonites. Never heard about Mennonites before I got to K-State. And the guy that I was living with found out that I was dating somebody from Hillsboro, and he said, what's their last name? And I said, Lowen, and he said, oh, one of those. But he let me marry her anyway, and we got married here in 78. But long after that, I got taken to a Lowen reunion, and half of Ebenfeld showed up. I said, Christine, who are all these people, and why are they all here? She said, well, they're all my relatives. I said, you have that many relatives? I don't even have second cousins. She said, you have second cousins, Dan. You just don't know who they are. We went to something a couple of weeks ago in Wichita and met a couple that were classmates of Christine's. And before they decided to get married, they did a search on genealogy websites and found out that they were 8th cousins. I said, 8th cousins? That doesn't even count, But having been accepted by the church here, living here in Hillsboro the past 4 years, when people ask who you are, and I say I'm a Smith, and they say, what are you doing here? Well, I'm married to a Lowen. Oh, we Lowen. And so then that starts that whole Mennonite game. But You know, it's just been a blessing to see how the Lord uses this congregation. We were with Teen Tech, and I remember the day that I was at work, and about 12:30 or 11:30 or quarter to 12, Christine called up and she said, "Dan, the washing machine is broke. It's full of dirty water, and I have another bucket of diapers to wash." I said, "Well, I'll be home at noon, and I'll take a look at it." And I fiddled with the washing machine as long as I could, and knew it was not going to be a quick fix. So I was sitting on the front porch with our older daughter and thinking, how are we going to do this? I know how much money's in the checkbook. I know how long it is till we get paid again. And then the mailman walked by and handed me 3 letters. And one was from Kayleen Unruh, and the WMS with a $300 check in it. And I said, well, I think we're going to get a new washing machine. And through these years that we've served in our time here in Hillsborough, I think what has been impactful for me is just seeing the character of this congregation for its own, and to serve the Lord, and just to provide a place where people can grow in their relationship with Him.
If you were here last night, you heard about the other washing machine, tears, and diaper story. We didn't get pizza.
I'll get Clint, and I'll come back to you.
I'll try to be brief, but many of you know Mr. Music at Tabor College. It was Herbert C. Rickard. And when Herbert C. Retired from Tabor, he became our choir, our director. He had the men's chorus all lined up, and we went to Marshall, Arkansas to do a program over there. And during that time that I was at Tabor College, and I was in the Tabor choir. Well, I was also playing guitar in a smaller group that needed to go to Marshall, but the rule was by Dr. Paul Wohlgemuth that if you skipped a choir concert at Tabor for any reason, you get kicked out of the choir. Now I had a choice. Do I go to Marshall, Arkansas, or do I stay home and sing in the choir? Well, they convinced me to go to Marshall. That was a kind of an interesting thing. We went down there and sang, because I played my guitar and we had a small group. Came back home, they said, don't worry, we will get you back in the choir if you know, it's really happening. Well, I came back home and I was out of the choir. I had to report to about a week later, I saw Leon Suderman, Orville Suderman, and another gentleman in suits and ties walking on the Tabor campus to meet Dr. Paul Wohlgemuth. The bottom line is it didn't work. I was out of the choir, but I became choir president the next year, so it was all right.
I'm Faye Hebert Russell, and my parents were Otto and Bernice Hebert. I grew up here, our family grew up here, and my dad had 3 brothers who were also here, my uncles and aunts. When I was growing up, there was a good representation of the Hebert family then. It was such a privilege, and I have looked back on it more and more through the years. I'm just remembering, as different people talk about the heritage of faith and what we've learned of God's Word and walking in His ways. My brother Dean, my oldest brother, told me much later in life that our dad had seriously considered earlier in life with our family possibly moving to Colorado. My dad loved the mountains. We took a lot of vacations in Colorado over in summer times. He loved Arizona and the Grand Canyon. He and my mom went there later years. But that he told Dean that he had thought about it, they prayed about it, and with all the community here, they decided to stay. This is where they wanted to raise the family. And I think of then what my life was like, starting in Sunday school, as soon as I was old enough to be in Sunday school, and then VBS, and also in those early years, Dean and Gordon, my brothers, my big brothers, were in country school over here, which my dad also went through 8th grade at this country school. But they would walk to and from school most days, and we lived a mile east and half north on the farm. And I would sit under the big, big cedar trees, tall cedar trees at the front of the driveway by the road with our dog, our collie, and wait for them to come home when I was 3 and 4 years old. And I was so excited to get to go. And just interwoven with that, I remember my mom taking me to school to visit more than once, but one time Viola Weeby was back home from India, the missionary, and she made rice and curry for the school, for the children, and that was the day my mom took me, and I just remember feeling so excited to be there with these older kids and my big brothers, and hearing her story about mission work, and then going on to VBS, which I guess I should say I was so excited to go to country school, and that was the very summer that they closed, just before I was to have gone. And then we were bused to Hillsborough, to public school there. But in VBS, I remember Dina, your mom, Elda Suderman, and just different other moms teaching our classes, and so much memory, scripture memory work. And I still remember so much of that scripture. And then Sunday school teachers, Lavella, Irene's daughter, that was also in our age group class, Irene teaching and learning more scripture, always emphasis on God's word and living God's word. And then missionaries coming to church and sharing on Sunday evenings, and it just was woven in us that was what our Christian, part of our Christian life was about. And then MBY, continuing, and choir, singing in the choir, as others have talked about. And I too am so grateful for opportunities to begin music, and at a young age here. All the opportunities that we had. And so I just look back and I count my blessings, and I'm so, so thankful for the heritage here, and also very thankful hearing today of looking forward to see what God has for us. I'm thankful for all of you. Where's Brad? Thanks be to God.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I forgot. Sorry.
Or maybe I don't have to. I just have one thing I thought of on the list. The rescue mission. When we came here, I had no idea what that was all about. But it was an exciting thing because regularly the church sent people to be speakers at the rescue mission. And very often it was Gaylord. And of course it meant an extra evening away, and you know, I was new to all that. But Gaylord, he was very gracious, and he always accepted the invitation. The group would eat out together, usually before or after the service, and in Wichita. And so sometimes Amy went with us because, you know, our family was together and we didn't get babysitters. And the one evening, Gaylord preached a salvation message, and Amy was about maybe 6 or 7. It was shortly after we had moved here, and she announced to me that when her daddy was preaching, she had accepted the Lord. Can you imagine? Yes, and that was awesome. So the beauty of giving out God's word, no matter what place, and our own daughter. And so keep on giving out the message, no matter where we are at.
Anybody else? If you don't do it today, you may do it 25 years later. Okay, good. Baritone, is that right? Baritone? Okay. Well, I don't know. I wish there was someone else who can wrap the whole weekend up besides me, but I think that does it. We've had a good one, Kayleen and your group, everybody. Maybe we should say who was all in that. Give me the list of who was all part of the plan, because it's been almost a year, I think, that they planned.
Yeah, Christine Smith, Donna Dalkey, and Dale Dalkey, Joel Suderman, Faye Russell, and Lori Meyer. Yeah, well, that was our crew.
Let's give them a really big hand. They did a great job. Okay, well, I guess I'll wrap it up. And 2026, Ebenfeld, 150 years old. So, okay, good night, good afternoon. Don't come back when the church is kind of dark, and we'll try to get the lights turned off, and we'll see you again. Come and visit anytime you want.